Welcome, Josie. How are you? Nice to meet you. Thanks for joining.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Will you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and how you got involved in sports psychology?
Yeah, so I'm Josie. I'm a sports psychologist based in London. I've been doing this, properly fully qualified for 8 years now, but it's a long process to get into sports psychology. So I actually started off my career in journalism, switched over to communications, and then in 2013, I was doing an Ironman race over in Australia. And I was standing on the beach about to get into the water and the waves looked horrific and I was utterly terrified. Even my husband, who's Australian, was looking a bit green at this point. And the guys on the tannoy said, you can't control the waves. You can only control how you feel about them. And it was a proper little light bulb moment going, if I use my brain a bit more, I could be a much better athlete. I am not built to be an athlete. It wasn't something I grew up doing. I grew up at kind of stage school. So it's definitely not felt like being an athlete was in my DNA. But actually, once I realized I could use my brain a bit more to get more out of myself, it was a really big light bulb moment. So I managed to get in the water that day, did the swim, had a great Ironman race, and it just got my brain ticking away about, how do I learn more about this? And actually, 12 years ago, there wasn't that much out there. There was Steve Peters, who's the most famous sports psychologist who isn't a sports psychologist. He's a psychiatrist. And that was it, really. So I really started studying it. I ended up leaving my job, going back to uni to do a master's in psychology. Then I had to do a master's in sport and exercise psychology. Then I discovered it was another 3 years of supervised practice to actually be properly qualified. So gone down that whole route. And then I've been running my own private practice ever since, mainly working with individual athletes.
Okay, amazing. Is Steve Peters the guy who wrote Chem Paradox?
Yes.
Yeah. I read that years ago, actually. So is there overlap between performance psychology? So in terms of how you might work with people who work in business and with athletes, is there techniques that cross over from those two disciplines?
All of them. So I use exactly the same techniques, tools, processes if I am working with, a junior tennis player or if I'm working with a senior medical consultant. There will be the same approach. I work from an approach called ACT, which stands for Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. And the tools, the techniques, they're all the same. We're just applying them in a different environment.
Talk a bit more about ACT, actually, because I know it's kind of orientated around like cognitive behavioral therapy, but it's a little bit different. It's based more around acceptance. So will you tell us a bit more about how ACT actually works? Because I think it's a newer therapy and I've seen it applied in sport and research, and I do find it very interesting.
I would say it's probably the predominant therapy that's used by sports psychologists now. So I find CBT quite aggressive, and it is good for fixing an issue. A single issue. It's kind of, we're taking this issue and we're going to attack it until we've done it, until you're fixed with that issue. But it doesn't give us a lifetime framework to work with. Whereas ACT is much more of a framework about how you think, behave and strive so that you can constantly be achieving your goals. So it comes from the idea that we all have worries. Someone once quoted to me, apparently we have 60,000 thoughts a day. Most of those are just thoughts. They're not something we need to do anything with. They're just thoughts. But particularly I work a lot with those who have ADHD. Those thoughts feel like they're just totally bombarding you. And often, because our brain's job is survival, they can be quite negative thoughts. What we very naturally want to do is try and ignore them, block them out, distract ourselves, run away from them. And we have lots of tools we use in life to do that. Things like exercise, things like alcohol, things like scrolling through our phone are all ways we try to block out many of those thoughts. But it doesn't actually help. So ACT is about almost embracing the fact we're going to have tons and tons of thoughts. Some of them are going to be very unhelpful, but noticing that we have them and learning to sit alongside those thoughts without having to respond to them. And the way I then take that into sport is about when we're on a start line or we're waiting for the whistle to go in a match, is that, yes, at some points we're going to feel the fear. And we're not trying to block out the fear. We're like, yeah, I'm feeling quite worried about this because it really matters to me. I really want to do well. So it's but I'm feeling the fear and I'm going to play at my best anyway in the service of the things that really matter to me. And that's usually our purpose and our values. So we spend some time getting to know our thoughts and not hiding from them, but accepting that we have them, noticing them. And then we're trying to choose which direction to make our behaviours in so that we can do the things that are right for our long-term goals and ambitions. And we're not having that instant reaction to our thoughts and behaviours and trying to run away.
And in terms of the ACT framework, how would you approach someone who gets anxious or nervous before competition or maybe during competition?
That's kind of 90% of my work. So we're first supporting somebody to understand their brain better and the psych education that goes into that. And the people that tend to get most anxious before performance are those who are highly intelligent and they're very perfectionistic. Because if you're highly intelligent, part of your brain is designed to be a prediction machine. It wants to work out what might happen to you so it can keep you safe. The cleverer you are, the more your brain can go off in all sorts of directions trying to figure that out. And that causes you to overthink. And the perfectionism element means you want to do everything perfectly. And I can't think of a single sport where there is perfection. Even in gymnastics, where you could get a 10 out of 10, there would still be something you could have done better or twisted or gone higher. So there's no perfection in sport. And yet if you're a perfectionist, that's what you're striving for all of the time. And when you don't reach it, because it's impossible, you beat yourself up and you start to give yourself lots and lots of those negative thoughts. So we spend some time really getting to know how the brain works and why it's giving you those thoughts, which helps to normalize it for those athletes. Then we're looking to restructure the way that we measure success. So we're not measuring success on the things that are easy to measure, like outcomes or scores. We are measuring success on the way we've behaved and the way we've acted and the tasks that we've achieved within individual games or races or competitions. So we're thinking about our input goals and how to live those, not our output goals that will end up judging ourselves. And then I break it down into a process I call the BRAVE process, which the B stands for being aware, actively trying to notice our thoughts. The R is reassigning them to your safety seeker. And that's a little creature we design, we draw, we get to know it, we work out what voice it gives us. That is probably living the theme of the most unhelpful thoughts because it wants us to stay in our comfort zone. We then look at self-advocacy, and that's the A, is like, how do we advocate better for ourselves? And we often use things like confidence jars or confidence banks to build that. Then we look at our values. Why are we going to overcome that fear that we're feeling? Why does it matter to us to do that? And then we turn all of those into the E, which is for engage, which will be mantras, small tools, techniques that we can use to stay on track when it feels like our brain is trying to take us off track.
And what would some of those tools be? So if you start to get derailed mid-performance or maybe before performance, how would you try to curtail that before it starts to spoil how you perform?
So if it's pre-performance, we can use things like breathing techniques, grounding tools to help us stay on track, to soothe our threat system, to calm everything down. In performance, that's obviously a lot harder. You can't stop mid-tennis match and start doing a breathing technique. In those, we tend to use mantras a lot, and we'll usually have an instructional mantra and a motivational mantra. So your instructional mantra will be a message to your brain about how to do the task you need to do better. So for me as a runner, I know if I start to get very negative in a race because I'm not doing as well as I would like, head up is my instructional mantra, because there's no point saying relax. That's too complicated an instruction to give your body. But if my head goes up, my shoulders go back, my chest opens up, I get more oxygen in, I can pick up my legs more, I run faster, I start to feel better. So we want very specific task-focused instructions. And then ideally something based around your values as a motivational mantra. So I have a daughter. The one message I want to teach her in life is that when things are hard, you don't quit. So if her mummy comes home from a race without a medal because she wimped out or it hurt too much or it was uncomfortable, that does not give her the message I want to give her, and I'm being a rubbish role model. So for me at that point, I can use my values, one of which is bravery, another one is family, to kind of really focus on, yes, this is really uncomfortable. I don't really want to be here anymore. Yes, I might fail and that would be embarrassing, but I'm trying anyway because I want to make her proud. And that turns into a make her proud, make her proud, make her proud kind of mantra that you almost start to run with as a rhythm.
That's really interesting. And in terms of like what people generally struggle with, do you find that it's usually anxiety based, as in maybe not performing to a perfectionist level, or can it be around confidence as well? Maybe just thinking that they're not good enough as an athlete, and do they kind of overlap a lot? And would you tackle them with different techniques?
I kind of see them on a scale. So at one end of that scale, we've got the incredibly anxious, feeling very, very uncomfortable in the environment they're trying to perform in, through to at the other end of it, feeling very comfortable in that environment, hyper confidence, doing really well. And so we'll be tackling lots of elements along the way. If someone doesn't have the anxiety levels and they don't need that kind of fear management, it's almost like we'd start work in the middle of that scale, and we'd be starting work with, how do we boost your confidence? How do we give you the skills to brilliantly prepare for what you do? But to be honest, in private practice, people don't come to you to just learn some really good mental skills. I've probably had 5 or 6 athletes over the year, their parents mainly, who will say, I want my child to become an elite athlete and I want them to be fully equipped with all the mental skills they need to be a great athlete. Can you teach them? And it's lovely to do, but that's actually very rare. Most times people are coming to you because there's some big, big barrier that's holding them back. And that is usually performance anxiety.
Have you ever seen situations where someone has extremely a high level of athletic ability? Maybe they're like, in terms of physical capacity, they're very fast, or their stamina is really good, but they can't get to an elite level because of psychological barriers. And then conversely, have you seen the other side of that, people who are maybe more psychologically ready, but they aren't elite in terms of physical capacity?
I will never know that because I don't work on the physical side. So if you're embedded within a team, I know, say you're a performance psych at a football club, then you will be able to work very closely in a multidisciplinary team. You will be able to see what the physios, what the managers, what the coaches are saying. And you'll be able to get a lot of that feedback of like, they're phenomenally talented, but it's not coming out. So often I will work with coaches for individual athletes, and they might be like, I can see there's a lot of potential, but they're held back by their mindset or their anxieties. And there's absolutely, that's what I'm there to then help with. There are other people, as I said, the people that struggle the most with the anxiety side tend to be the highly intelligent perfectionists. The people that don't struggle with the psychology side so much, but will struggle more with getting the most out of their physiology, will be those who are very pragmatic. And I'm one of them. I quite like to be a perfectionist at times because it would make me a lot better at what I could do, even though it causes kind of lots of more mental health issues. But if you're a pragmatist, you're doing what your brain is designed for. Your brain is designed for your survival, and it's designed to keep you in your comfort zone. And so you listen to that and you stay in your comfort zone and you do fine, but you often struggle to push yourself outside of your comfort zone because it's not a logical thing to do. Like, elite high-level athletes are not particularly healthy in terms of the amount of training they're doing and the elements they're able to push themselves to. So World Health Organization suggests we should be doing about 5 hours of exercise a week. And once you start going over that, then actually you might start to kind of be doing more harm to your body. You're never going to be an elite athlete if you're only doing 5 hours a week. So there is that kind of really difficult line that those people are leading in order to do the thing they love at the highest level. They're actually having to probably push themselves beyond what is brilliantly healthy. And so those of us that are more pragmatic are probably much easier to stick within that limit, but it means we're never going to be brilliant.
And where is the line there between trying to be as good as possible and maybe eliminating or not getting to the stage where you get an exercise addiction or a compulsion to have to push yourself harder? Because obviously, even for an elite athlete who has to train maybe 15, 20 hours a week, there is a point where you get into overtraining and burnout. So how you prevent that? And you see exercise addiction commonly with high level athletes or high achievers.
I see it with high achievers, not necessarily with high level athletes, because exercise addiction isn't based on how many hours you do or how many miles you run. Whether we would consider someone has exercise addiction is based on whether it is sustainable for their body and their lifestyle. So if you're a 20-year-old at university on a high level athletics program and you're training 20, 25 hours a week, it's not actually harming you in the same way that a 50-year-old man who's training for Ironman, has got 3 kids at home, and is also supposed to be working hard in an office. If he's doing 25 hours a week, I've worked with some of them, they end up divorced. They end up not seeing their kids so much. They end up with stress fractures because they've already got a lot of strain going through their body. They end up exhausted. So at that point, 25 hours a week, when you've got all of these other responsibilities, we would probably class as an exercise addiction. But for
do you think it's like escapism? Like, are they trying to escape something else? They're replacing another part of their life with exercise to give them meaning. Do you think that's what's going on there?
It's different for everybody. A lot of exercise addiction is actually linked to body image and to disordered eating. So many people are using that level of exercise to purge calories. So it's a really complicated area. It's not as simple as that. But when we get to addiction, a lot of the theories around addiction talk about actually what addiction is a craving to belong. And we don't feel like we belong. And doing more and more and more of something with similar people who have the same loves as you allows us to feel like we belong. And you see that, we used to see it with Ironman. We now see it with things like High Rocks. You see it when people are posting on Strava and they want the kudos and they want that connection with other people. And doing a lot of exercise and pushing yourself really hard can help you feel like you're getting that connection. So it's serving a very good purpose for them.
That's good to know. Obviously, when people play sport, it's not just going to be the sport that's the only thing in their lives. There's going to be maybe baggage or maybe difficulties coming from outside the sport as well. So is there times where you have to say, well, I'm a sports psychologist, so I'm going to deal with the sports side of it, but they may have to see a therapist or another professional to deal with things that aren't orientated around the sport? Because obviously, I assume there's situations where people are bringing anxiety into game situations or even training that's not orientated around performance.
Our training as sport and exercise psychologists is focused on performance. However, as I said, most people don't come and see you because it's purely a performance issue going on. They come because there are lots of different barriers to their success. So most of us will do a huge amount of training once we're formally trained to be able to help support in other areas too. So we will never step outside our competency. There are certain areas that I will always refer on. So if I can see an athlete's got a high level of trauma, I will always refer them to an EMDR specialist who can help them work with the trauma. If they've got anorexia, I will refer them on to an eating disorder specialist. Although I would work with someone who's got relative energy deficiency in sport. We call it Red S. And I've had a lot of training to do that. If it's things like OCD, and there are a lot of OCD elements, again, we would refer on to a clinical specialist. So part of our job is to be able to analyse what might be going on and to make sure that we're only ever working in our area of competency. And we've got good enough connections around the edges of that we can make sure we can send our athlete onto somebody who still gets athletes, but their expertise is more on the clinical side.
And in terms of I know you've wrote a book about ADHD and how that presents in athletes and how to maybe work with people who play sport with an ADHD diagnosis. So would you orientate your strategies or maybe change your strategies a little bit to work with ADHD athletes? Would you have a different approach to maybe the neurotypical population?
So when I work, because of the book, I do a lot of work with coaches, and I run big workshops with coaches on how to better support athletes with ADHD, because they're the ones who are with them most of the time. And in that, I have 20 different tools that you can use, not necessarily tools, but approaches, I guess, you can use to be much more supportive of your neurodivergent athletes. They are all tools that will work better with every athlete that you have. So I remember one coach saying to me, like, right, so I've got 10 kids out of 100 on a Saturday morning who's got ADHD. Am I supposed to adapt everything for those 10? And I was like, well, if you do, everyone will benefit from it. There was one coach I interviewed for the book called Jess. She was awesome. She is a rugby league coach, and she's just so passionate. She almost got me wanting to do rugby league. And as a triathlete, that's definitely not my world. But she talked about how she adapts all of her sessions for the neurodivergent athletes, and it works for everybody. So things like, she has a 5-minute rule. If somebody shows up after work and they're just not feeling it that night, anything could be wrong. They could have just got their period. They could have had a fight with somebody at work. They could have got yelled at by somebody at work. They could just have too many sensory issues going on and they need it. They're allowed to go 5 minutes and they're allowed to go off. She sets up the pitch so that they've got music at one end for the girls that really like to play to music and know that they've kind of got that helps up their arousal levels. And the others can go down the other end where it's quieter and there's less sensory issues. So she just thinks about, how do I include everybody in everything I do? And that doesn't mean I have to adapt it. It's just, how do we make sure this works with all sorts of brains in mind? And it sounds like what she's doing is really effective. So there are some specific tools I will use with athletes with ADHD, particularly around organisation, because that can be very tricky, around time management, because again, that can be hard. And energy management is probably the biggest one. So those are not things I would probably do with a neurotypical athlete. But they're things that can work for all of us. I use a lot of the techniques at home.
Talk a little bit more about energy management, because I think what you're getting at there is maybe somebody with an ADHD, maybe personality traits or a diagnosis might go maybe all out at the beginning and they might burn out quicker. Is that what you mean?
Can be. It depends when their energy shows up in the day. So one of the athletes in the book talked about the 9 p.m. zoomies. So suddenly you're tired, 9 p.m. ping, wide awake now. And now I've got 2 hours of buzzing around when everyone else in my household wants to be chilling out and going to bed. So the approach that I use is called coins. And in that, we are looking at, when you wake up in the morning, we've all got 100 coins to spend. And coins are like little modules of energy and attention. Where are you going to spend them? So most of us have some requirements where we get no choice how we spend them. So if you're at school, you're going to have to spend a certain amount of coins at school. Then you've got training after school. Then you've got some homework to do. Then you might want to chat to your friends or play PlayStation. And you're really then having to think about, well, I really struggle in maths, so I'm going to need a lot more of my attention in maths. That's 20 coins. Oh, I can drift off a bit more when I'm doing this element because I find that easy. And you start to plan your day around where your energy is going to come from. Because if you're spending, if you're hyper-focused on something, which can obviously show up with ADHD, and then suddenly you spend 120 coins of energy in that day, you're depleted for the next day. But if you do that day after day after day, you're very quickly in burnout. And athletes with ADHD hit burnout a lot more than other athletes. So we really want to help them learn how to manage their energy so that it's much more sustainable over time.
In terms of psychological readiness, is there one metric or maybe a few metrics that tells you the athlete is ready, or maybe they've got better control of their psychological state for performance? Is there anything there you rely on or go to?
I don't think I do, because it's going to be so different every time. There are so many elements that impact how we perform, and some of them we won't even know we're dealing with. So you could have caught a bug. I've got a lot of athletes that will fly overseas for competitions. They could have caught some bug on the plane over there. Doesn't show up in their body until the day of their race. and they're fighting it without knowing it, but they're wondering why they can't get their wattage up on the bike or why their heart rate won't go to a certain point. There's nothing they can do about it. I mean, they can do a lot of hand washing and they can wipe down everything on the plane. There are ways you try and protect yourself, but often there are things you just don't know that you're dealing with. So we're not trying to, a lot of people talk about things like mental toughness and I need to be really mentally tough. That irritates me no end, because I mean, it's used a lot by people in this field, kind of the mindset coaches of like, it's an icy. Yeah. Well, grit is a bit different. Grit has a bit more substance behind it. But that kind of, I'm going to make you mentally tough. It's like, no, you're not. Because actually what happens if somebody is too tough to things, when we measure them with the mental toughness metrics we have, is they end up injured. They end up burnt out because they're not able to assess the situation that's in front of them and figure out the best way to deal with it that's most effective for their long-term goals. What we try to do within ACT is help athletes become mentally flexible. Because when you're flexible, you're not having an instant reaction to everything that happens. You're able to assess it and have a response. And responses are much more logical and thought through, and you'll make a much better decision. So we do want an athlete to be able to stand on a start line or come out the changing room going, I'm up for this. And we'll help them discover what their right level of arousal is and ways to get into that. We use lots of things like music or mantras or certain warm-up or pre-race match routines that help you get to that right level of, I guess, readiness. But actually what we really want for an athlete that's going to be really proud of the ways they've behaved afterwards is to be mentally flexible, to be in that moment, notice something happening and choose how to deal with it rather than have an immediate reaction, which is probably threat-based.
In terms of injury, like dealing with injury or maybe dealing with a very harsh loss, is there any techniques or strategies you can use there? Because obviously high-level athletes really get frustrated, or even people who are very committed to their sport at a lower level get very frustrated with injuries. So is there anything psychologically you can tell yourself, an approach you can take to kind of deal with that better?
Injury is probably the hardest element to deal with as an athlete because it stops you doing the thing you love. And it doesn't just stop you doing the thing you love, it stops you doing the thing that probably helps you emotionally regulate, get better mental health. We know the benefits of exercise are phenomenal for physical health, but also like your cognitive health, your social connections. And so when we can't do it because we're injured, we are losing so much of ourselves. And particularly if we connect what we do with who we are. So it's not just, I run. It's like, I'm a runner. You've got a stress fracture and you can't run for 3 months. That's your whole identity wiped out. So one of the things I spend a lot of time, ideally pre-injury, with an athlete on is who else are they? What else matters to them? I think we're really lucky in triathlon because when we get injured in one area, there's usually something else we can do that we still love. Probably similar for kind of high rocks athletes, any multi-sport elements. So we are always looking to kind of go, well, what is the thing you can still do that you will enjoy? Because we've got to be able to give somebody some way of getting that enjoyment into their life. If they're injured, we want them to try and be upfront about that injury rather than just ignore it. And that mental toughness thing, if like, it'll go away. It's like, it probably won't. And it's much better to try and get a diagnosis early on before it's got really bad than find yourself having 6 months off because you've gone from a stress response to a full-on stress fracture. So we are trying to get them to do things like training diaries so that they can scan their body during training to try and notice any niggles to get things dealt with early on. We then want experts involved. So it's like, know that you've got a physio on tap that you can go to that already knows your body fairly well. Know who's in your support team to be able to help you through it. We'll do things like goal setting for recovery, so you still feel like you're moving in the right direction. And we really, really want athletes to still keep their social connections with their sport. So I love it when people will still go down the golf club and hang out with their friends. I love it when coaches make people like non-playing captain, because it allows them still to have that connection. Some will go down and coach or assistant coach whilst they're off. So they've still got that social element that sport brings us. So anything you can do to keep somebody connected to their sport, finding the things they can do rather than focusing on all the things they can't, and helping them see that plan for recovery, that can be really helpful.
Why do you think people drop out of sport earlier, maybe now than before, especially with female athletes in the teenage years, or maybe when they start college or move away from home? You see a bit of a dropout from sport. And is there any way to maybe mitigate against that a bit?
We actually see the dropout starting at about 9, which is really scary. It's really young. Some of that, I think, is because some of the sports, you kind of age out if you're not going to go down a competitive route. So my daughter's 9, she does gymnastics. They don't actually offer anything after the age of 11, because you're either in a competitive route by then or you've kind of aged out of gymnastics. So some of the options that girls particularly love and have kind of been pushed into kind of stop unless they're getting really competitive with it. But the biggest thing I see is that when there was a study in America where they asked kids why they do sport. Guess where winning was on that list?
I would say, how many items? Let's say 5. I think it was 5th.
Well, 100 items, 100 reasons.
Okay. 50. So we're midpoint.
81st.
Okay.
Right, so they could find 80 other reasons that were more important than winning as to why they do their sport. Most of them were around it's fun and they see their friends. Right? They like learning new skills and all those other elements. But winning stuff was 81st. And yet, when you get to high school, that's what it's focused on. That's what coaches start selecting on. And it's not I know coaches get really upset with me when I kind of talk about we need to make it fun for everybody, because they're like, yeah, but people also need to lose. People need to learn how to lose. It's like, of course we do. We need to learn that we can't win at everything, and we need to learn how to learn from every experience we go into so we continue to develop and get better at things. But when everything comes onto winning and it's overly competitive, that sucks a lot of the joy out of it. A lot of people get separated from their friends. Oh, they're in the A team and now I'm stuck in the B team. I'm not doing it anymore. And the things they got from it have gone.
In the last decade with social media, there's been a rise in kind of influencer culture and maybe gym culture. Do you think that's a healthy alternative for people who maybe don't want to play a team sport, or do you think it's too aesthetically focused? And is it better to have a gym element and also play a competitive sport, or something that's not just oriented around aesthetics?
I don't think there's a right answer to that, because there isn't a right or wrong sport for anybody. It's about finding the thing that you love. And we'll often go through different seasons in our life of like, and I'll work with adult athletes who are like, yeah, I played loads of football as a kid and then I got into tennis and then I loved this and I did a bit of rowing at uni and then I did this and now I find myself here. And why not? If something works for us and we find it fun and we enjoy it, brilliant, we're going to do more of it. So if that gym life is for you and watching a bunch of influencers on Instagram gets you excited about it, go for it. Like, there's no judgment. Well, not for me. It's about what do you love and how do you do enough of it safely to be able to keep you really healthy, well connected, feeding your brain effectively, making you creative. If team sports are not for you, don't do them. And that's part of the issue around school elements of you're pushed into certain sports because that's what you do in the summer term or that's what you do in the autumn term. And it's good to give you an idea of whether you like it or not, but we absolutely should be giving everybody as many opportunities to try as many different things as possible so that they find the thing they love.
Yeah, and like you said, that's a good point. People do go through different phases and people move on to different things at different stages in their life, depending on time commitments and what they're into at that moment. In terms of so there was a big deal maybe a few years ago about habits and how habits are maybe superior to motivation because they're kind of process oriented and you could build a structure to achieve goals. So how do you think about habits and motivation together? Because I think in school, you're like, everyone talks about motivation and setting goals, but maybe like building habits isn't something that's discussed a lot. So what are your thoughts around both of those things?
I think they're actually quite separate. So we want a lot of good habits because that takes away choice points. And a lot of the time around exercise, like if I look out the window here right now, it's raining, it's grim. I'm actually in my run kit still from this morning. I haven't actually run yet. I'll probably still be in my run kit 8 o'clock tonight, right? Because it's not a habit at the moment for me. There's some motivation, but not enough to actually get me out of the door. But I'm going to do, with a group of friends on Facebook for November, we do a 30 and 30. So 30 minutes of running every day for November because it helps you get into a habit. It's not quite long enough because apparently on average it takes 66 days to build a new habit. So I might have to run into December too. But habits are awesome because they take away choice points. And when we're stressed, we're anxious, we're feeling under threat, we're feeling overwhelmed, we've got too much stuff going on, we will take the easiest choice there is, which is often not to do the thing we know we should do. So that's one side of it. Motivation. There's 3 types of motivation, according to the self-determination theory, which is what many of us work from. There's amotivation. Oh, I can't be bothered. Which is probably where I am with running right now. There's extrinsic motivation, which is I am doing this because I have some external validated goal that will make me feel good. I get a nice medal at the end of it. I get a PB. I get my name in the paper if I win. There's all those elements. And those can be good. They don't last that long. And then there's intrinsic motivation, which is I'm doing this because I love it. And that feeling when I'm out there, oh, it's amazing. And we get more intrinsic motivation when we put 3 pillars in place: autonomy, belonging, and competency. So if I felt like a better runner, if I was more masterful at it, if I'd been running fast recently, I'd probably be more motivated to go out there. If I was a member of a running club that I could actually go and, I am a member of a running club, but it's too far away, so I never go. If I was a member of a local running club where I knew at 6:30 every Monday night everybody was meeting up and I would have that feeling of belonging, I'd be there. If I had somebody local to me that was similar speed as me and I could meet up in the mornings to run, I'd be there. So it can be helpful to use that knowledge about needing to have that autonomy, have that belonging, and have that competence to figure out how to start to develop better habits so that we do the thing we need to do. But they're not kind of an either or. Ideally, we have really good habits and we understand the best ways to motivate ourselves so that we can achieve our goals.
Let's just take an example. So let's say someone maybe is in their 30s, they haven't played sports since they were a teenager, they want to get back into exercise. Should they wait for a burst of motivation to start, or should they make a plan and just try and build on basic habits? Like for someone who hasn't exercised in years, what's the best strategy there?
I'd say you need your why as to why you're exercising. And often it is some big kind of trigger point. It's the GP telling you that you're really unhealthy. Or I read a lovely story this morning of a mum who's she's running her first marathon because her daughter asked to go to parkrun, junior parkrun. And so she ran the 2 kilometres with her daughter and realised, I quite enjoyed that. And then her daughter wanted to go back the next week. And so she got into it that way. But it wasn't I want to go and run a marathon. It was like, I want to do something for my daughter. Often a lot of people do their first marathon for charity. And it's not that you're doing it because sometimes it's that bucket list thing, but it's like, this is a really good way to raise money for something I really care about. There's a big why in there. And again, if it's about your health, it's like, well, what is this going to give you in your life? Is going to play football in the park mean you can actually play with your kids for longer because you're not getting puffed out or you're not feeling like you don't want to go? So it's about finding that why and then connecting the exercise to that. How will that exercise allow you to get the why that you care about?
In your opinion, what's the hardest sport psychologically and physically, and are they the same thing?
I have two, I think, psychologically are horrifically hard. One of which would probably surprise you is golf.
I read that in your Substack.
Yeah, because I find it hard enough when I'm running with thoughts popping up, being unhelpful, telling you don't have to do this. You could walk, you could stop, you could get the tube home, right? So, and that's like doing an hour's run. But golf, you're out there for 4 or 5 hours. And a lot of golfers are highly intelligent perfectionists, and they're trying to hit that perfect shot. And as soon as it isn't perfect, there's suddenly that doubt and that judgment and that feeling like you're being judged by other people, and certainly by yourself. And so you're basically dragging a lot of those negative thoughts around the course with you for 4 or 5 hours. So I think for that reason, golf psychologically is really hard, even though physically it doesn't. Obviously, you've got a lot of skills-based work in there, but you're not going to have the endurance level or the high heart rate or cardio element that you might have in other sports. The other one I think is really hard is tennis, because tennis, you are facing your opponent. And actually, in a lot of sports, you're not facing your opponent. You're not eye on eye with them. And you're not able to just do your thing. So as a runner, I've got my opponents around me if I'm there to compete. But I'm not having to look at them, and I'm not changing what I'm doing based on them. Whereas in tennis, you're having to respond to their movements. And that's really hard. And when your threat system triggers, there are physiological changes that happen. You get a bad tummy. You've got a lot of adrenaline and cortisol that flood your body. It goes straight to your tummy, makes you feel quite nauseous. Your heart rate gets faster. Your breathing rate gets faster. Your senses switch off. Those impact all of us in our sport. But the biggest thing that happens is that your back and shoulder muscles get super tight and tense. So you've still got the habitual technique in there, but when almost over the top of that, you've got tension, you are not able to hit the ball where you want it to go, which is really hard in golf, obviously, because you're trying to hit the ball often a long way. And in tennis, it means your shots are out. So if you think back to Wimbledon finals, women's finals this year, back in June, July, the BBC had allocated 3 hours to the final, and it was over in 57 minutes. They had to actually put like some antique show on afterwards because they'd got nothing else to broadcast, because the final was 6-love, 6-love, because you could see as soon as it started going wrong, it went really, really wrong. And at that point, it's like, there is nothing you can do. Your body's been taken over by the adrenaline and cortisol. You're just, we always talk about fight or flight, but it's actually fight, flight, fawn or freeze. And so to me, it looked like there was a freeze response going on. At that point, there's too much tension. You are unable to get the logical part of your brain back in control, and you're just playing under threat. And that becomes incredibly difficult. And if you're doing that when the whole world is watching you play and you're live on the BBC and it's probably the biggest match of your career, nightmare.
Why does that happen sometimes in team sports? Like, you see, maybe if a team has a bad first half performance, they kind of just implode together. Like, is there some kind of kinetic thing going on where one player's bad performance, maybe if he is the main, or he or she is the main player, it affects everybody else in the team as well? Like, sometimes you just see a whole team collapse.
I don't think it's like contagious, but we do really pick up on the people around us. It doesn't take much for a couple of negative comments from people to really kind of filter through an environment. In fact, I've just been out in Canada for a worldwide sports psychology conference, and there was a lot of talk about how do we work with tweens, because that's actually a big area of growth in sports psychology, is like the 10 to 13 year olds. And so there was a lot of talk in that about when some of them start being really negative about themselves or the team, how that spreads through a team, and how do we pick them up on it to try and make them realize that. And someone brought up this lovely game that they use with their groups called Pineapple. So every time one of your tweens starts being negative, one of their teammates is allowed to say pineapple. And if they start being positive, you can use mango. And the idea is not to focus on how many goals you might score. The idea is to finish a game with more mangoes than pineapples.
So it's like a cue to change the atmosphere kind of thing.
Yeah, because if someone keeps saying pineapple every time you're negative, you're going to stop it pretty quick. So it's a really nice thing about...
like a conditioned response almost.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
So things like that can be quite nice to help people be much more self-aware of how their behaviours are impacting their performance so that they can start to think about it differently.
Just on that, I don't know, we're nearly out of time. Is it different to work with teenagers? Is it more difficult? And would you have to be maybe more sensitive, or would you have to take a slightly different approach?
I love working with teenagers. Like, you see all this stuff in the news about teenagers and how awful they are and all these things that they're doing. I just meet the best bunch of kids. It gives me real hope. And maybe it's because they're so invested in their sport that they're such awesome kids. But I love working with teenagers. Like, my athletes are awesome. I learn a lot from them, and they seem to really, really engage. You do have to think a bit differently about how you talk. I think particularly now at my age, I have to really think about how do I ask them for more of their opinions on things rather than trying to put it into my own terminology. And particularly, I think it's helpful now I've got a 9-year-old. She tells me what's cool, what I need to know about, whether I'm talking about 6-7 or demon hunters or whatever the next APT annoying thing is. So you can feel like you've got more of that connection. But I think it's the younger age that are harder, where you're trying to explain concepts that are probably quite complicated. In fact, I thought I was having the loveliest conversation with my daughter riding to gymnastics camp this morning. And we're on our bikes and I was explaining something. And she went, "Oh, mummy, I understood every word you said just then." And I went, I was just feeling like, woohoo, look at me. And she went, "Except every word you just said." I was like, whoa, bring me back down to earth. And she's obviously going to be honest with me. If I had a 9-year-old in my clinic, they wouldn't. They'd just nod and smile and think, who's this strange lady? So I guess the younger you get, the more physical stuff we're trying to do, the more we're down on the floor of a clinic using cards, craft, creating pictures, drawing, things that put things into their concepts rather than my adult language.
Last thing, and we'll leave it then. So there's more and more research coming out about the cognitive benefits of exercise, and maybe it's a strong link to talk about maybe exercise as a prevention or a mitigating factor in cognitive decline. But are you optimistic about the cognitive benefits of exercise and where that area of research is going? And I guess we can focus on acute cognitive benefits, so like maybe clearing your head or helping focus in the short term, and long-term benefits as well, because obviously you're getting more oxygen to the brain and stuff like that.
Yeah. So a lot of this work is actually done around ADHD, because we know there are cognitive difficulties if you have ADHD. And so they do a lot of the research to be able to understand how to support those people better. What it actually tells us is these elements are also incredibly effective for helping all of us keep up our cognitive abilities. So we used to think things like, once you were over the age of being a child, you would start to lose neurons in your brain, and there was nothing your brain could do to develop new neurons. We actually know that new neurons can be created in your brain. They're created in the hippocampus region, which is where your memory and learning are stored, and they're created by doing exercise. So a lot of the work is trying to find out what type of exercise is most effective, if there's almost like a prescription for exercise. And that's really hard, because when they do studies, they test almost a specific prescription rather than testing all the different types you could do and then figuring out which one works the best. So
and all the studies are designed differently, and it's hard to put them together.
It is
and
really
samples
hard.
Can be small and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yes. But when they do look at kind of meta-analyses of studies into exercise and cognitive benefits, they are all moving in a really positive direction, that it can really, really help. So, I mean, I have an awesome friend. She's 82. She runs a charity for keeping retirees active and connected. They go for a cup of tea, they go and do some exercise, they play badminton, they do walking football, they do Bollywood dance, they have another cup of tea afterwards, and they go off on their way. And it is such an excellent way to see people maintaining their cognitive abilities, their connections with other people, their feeling of belonging and part of that community. And they're doing that after retirement. But ideally, we keep people in exercise throughout their whole lives so that they have a better retirement.
Well said. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed that. And well done, the books and the Substack as well. I really enjoy reading them. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.